Sadie Cohen, Bounty Hunter, Part 10. Justice on the Devil's Rails, by Glory Fink. Content Advisory. Railroad sabotage, labor unrest, threats of violence, and the arrest of corrupt officials. Previously, in Sadie Cohen, Bounty Hunter, Part 9, Millie warned Blackspur's workers to walk away before the company buried them in debt and danger. Tilly headed east with stolen documents, ready to expose the railroad's deadly secrets. Sadie and Clem tracked Jeremiah Fox-Eyed Finch, uncovering ledgers that listed every man Blackspur had paid or destroyed. The bounty hunter realized Finch wasn't the target, he was the key. With proof of Blackspur's crimes in hand, the war for the rails and revenge was about to explode. Sabotage in the shadows. The trick to sabotage ain't the dynamite or the wire cutters, it's timing. Hit a supply wagon at the wrong bend in the trail, and you've robbed a mule teamster trying to feed his family. Snip the wrong telegraph line, and you might keep a midwife from reaching a woman in labor. Trouble is, Blackspur's claws stretch so wide across the territory, you can't make a move without brushing against somebody else's life. Clem calls that collateral inconvenience. I call it the kind of sin that keeps you awake staring at the rafters. We struck before dawn, shadows long and forgiving. Jeremiah had the men mapped out like soldiers on a battlefield, each foreman's weakness noted down to whether they favored coffee or whiskey at breakfast. Clem handled the charm, grinning like this was just another game of cards, and me? I kept my hand on the reins, making sure our little war didn't chew up the innocent along with the guilty. First, the wagons. Jeremiah had Sweetwater men swap the axle bolts for shoddy ones, nothing deadly, just enough to see Blackspur's supplies scattered across the ravine. I kept watch on the ridge, rifle across my knees, reminding myself the mules weren't at fault for the company that owned them. Next, the telegraph lines. Clem scampered up poles like a fox with a grin, snipping copper and leaving the town deaf to Blackspur's orders. He came down with sawdust in his hair and kissed my knuckles like we were at a dance hall instead of gutting a company from the inside. Last, the accidents. Tools gone missing, ledger swap, contracts salted with forgeries Jeremiah had cooked up. This was his real gift, not the gun, but the word. Blackspur liked to think they owned men with ink and signatures. Jeremiah showed them ink could be a weapon sharper than any knife. By sunup, the company's proud empire was staggering. Bloodied but not yet dead, and I felt that pinch in my chest again. The kind that whispered, maybe we'd set loose a beast that would lash out at whoever was closest. Clem wiped the soot off his hands and grinned. Reckon we just taught Blackspur how to dance. Jeremiah's eyes burned steady. This ain't no dance. It's the first strike of a war. And I just prayed none of the innocent would be trampled when the shooting started. The walkout. I've seen gunfights, jailbreaks, and stampedes, but nothing quite so wild as the sight of hundreds of men laying down their hammers in unison. It started small. A handful of Chinese workers stepping back from the rails, faces unreadable as carved stone. Then another group followed, then another, until the rhythm of picks and sledges died like a heartbeat gone still. Foremen hollered themselves raw, waving rifles, cracking whips in the dust, but the men didn't break stride. One by one, they slung their tools over their shoulders and walked. Not ran, walked. Straight-backed, steady, like a tide rolling away from the shore, and no force on earth was about to stop it. Jeremiah stood on a wagon bed with his arms wide, calling in English and Cantonese both, promises of fair pay, decent food, respect for the hands that carved mountains. I don't know how much every man understood, but I saw heads lift, saw pride kindle like a lantern in the dark. And all the while Jeremiah had brought armed men with him. Quiet shadows at the edges of the crowd, rifles slung, eyes scanning for trouble. Every laborer knew the stories. From newspapers, from letters, from gossip drifting in from the east. Innocent men shot dead by foremen or hired guns for daring to lay down a hammer and walk. Fear and history walked alongside them, but Jeremiah's men were a shield, a promise that this time no one would fall for simply claiming the dignity of leaving. Clem leaned close, his voice warm against my ear. Tell me that don't look like the greatest jailbreak in the West. I couldn't argue. The sight of it near knocked the breath out of me. Not just a strike, not just a walkout. This was freedom, bold as daylight. These men had risked avalanches, blasting powder, starvation, all for wages that barely kept their bellies full, and now they were claiming something better. I should have been cheering with Jeremiah, grinning like Clem. Instead, I found myself watching their faces. Some proud, some fearful, Some just tired. They weren't pawns in the feud between railroad barons. They were men, bone, blood, and hope, stepping out from under a yoke. The foreman cursed, threatened, raised rifles. My hand brushed the gun at my hip, but the workers didn't so much as flinch. They just kept walking. Past the shouting, past the violence, straight toward Sweetwater's banners Jeremiah had planted by the edge of camp. By the time the sun dipped westward, Blackspur's tracks were near deserted. And for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe justice didn't always ride in with a badge. Sometimes it just walked away, tool slung over its shoulder, daring the world to follow. The reckoning. You can tell a marshal by the sound of his boots before you ever see the badge. Not the scuff of a town sheriff, not the clatter of some hired gun, but a heavy, measured thud that says, Uncle Sam's here to count heads and cuff criminals. They rode in 4 across, dust rising like Judgment Day. Starched coats, wide hats, pistols polished bright. The townsfolk scattered, leaving only the curious and the damned in their path. Blackspur's men didn't know whether to draw or run. Before they could decide, the U.S. Marshals were already unrolling papers thick with seals and signatures. By order of the United States District Court, the lead marshal barked, we are here to place Judge Bartholomew Greeves, Sheriff Reuben Murdock, and named employees of the Blackspur Railroad Company under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and unlawful seizure of land. I reckon nobody ever expected to hear those words in this dust-bitten corner of the frontier, least of all Greeves himself. The judge puffed up like a bullfrog. This is an outrage! I'm an officer of the law! The marshal cut him short with a snap of irons. You're a criminal under it. Sheriff Murdock reached for his gun, but one look at the rifles leveled his way cooled his hand quick. They bound him, too, along with a string of Blackspur foremen, and marched the lot down Main Street in chains. Folks lined the road, silent as church. Some spat, some whispered prayers. For the first time in memory, the law felt like it belonged to the people instead of the men who bought it. I ought to have felt triumphant. Instead, I just watched, arms folded, unease coiling in my gut. Paper justice looks fine on the surface, but I know how easy power wriggles loose from manacles. Men like Greeves don't quit. They lie in wait, sharpening their knives on the bars of their cells. Once a criminal has had a taste of how easy it is to abuse and use power, they always crave more. As they hauled him past, the judge caught my eye. His voice was low, venomous just for me. This railroad ain't done with you, Tex. Blackspur will lay its tracks straight through your grave. I kept my face flat, though my hand twitched toward my gun. No sense in giving the man satisfaction. He was chained. The chains rust, and threats have a way of keeping their shine. Clem slid up beside me, lips quirking in a half smile. Well, darling, looks like the law finally decided to get dressed for supper. Maybe, I muttered, watching Marshals' dust clouds swallow the prisoners whole. But supper don't mean the chorin' is over. The trail ahead. By sundown, the dust of the U.S. Marshals had blown clear, leaving Dry Brush looking like a town that had just woken from a bad dream. Folks went back to their porches and poker tables, pretending they hadn't just watched half the law hauled off in irons. Me, Clem, and Jeremiah found ourselves on the edge of camp, where Sweetwater's men were pitching tents and sharpening saws for the work ahead. The air smelled of canvas, wood smoke, and something rare still, hope. Jeremiah stood tall among them, sleeves rolled, voice steady. He wasn't just a saboteur anymore. He was an organizer, a man building something instead of tearing it down. I could see it in the way the workers listened to him, like he was the first boss who'd ever looked them in the eye. This is just the start, he said, more to himself than us. Sweetwater can treat men right, and if they do, Blackspur won't have a prayer. Clem stretched, restless as ever, flicking his cigarette into the dirt. That's fine, sermon preacher, but I'm itching for the next hand. Sweetwater's nice and all, but I don't reckon I was built to swing a hammer. He flashed me a grin. Reckon I was built for trouble. I smiled back, though, my chest tightened. Clem was trouble, sure enough. Beautiful, dangerous trouble. I couldn't seem to quit him. And Jeremiah was steady ground, building something bigger than any of us. Between them, I felt the tug of 2 lives I wasn't sure I could hold in the same pair of hands. And then there was Rivka's letter, folded tight in my pocket, heavy as a bullet. My sister's voice calling me home across 1,000 miles. Before I could drown too deep in thought, a murmur rippled through the camp. Word traveled fast. Blackspur wasn't dead, not by half. They'd already sent word east, hiring new guns to ride west and take back what the law had stolen. Not just foremen this time, mercenaries, cutthroats, men with no interest in rails or justice, only blood and coin. I looked out across the wide horizon, dusk bleeding into night. The war wasn't over. It had just changed uniforms. Clem tilted his hat back and gave me a low whistle. Well, darling, looks like the next dance partners are already saddling up. I tightened my grip on Rivka's letter and the gun at my side. Whatever came next, I had a feeling it was going to test which I trusted more. Family, love, or the weight of the iron in my hand. Sadie's crew won the day, but the railroad war was just shifting tracks. Coming soon in Part 11, The Guns of Blackspur. The dust has settled, Blackspur's foremen are chained, and the workers have walked free, but the war for the rails is far from over. Mercenaries ride west with blood on their boots, and the frontier trembles under the weight of their vengeance. Sadie, Clem, and Jeremiah must strike first, or risk watching everything they fought for burn. Next stop, bullets, betrayal, and a showdown where even the cleverest sabotage may not be enough. Thanks for riding with Sadie Cohen, Bounty Hunter. Your support keeps this outlaw tale alive and helps queer voices thrive. If you enjoyed this chapter, you could tap the heart button, leave a comment. Sadie's always listening for fresh gossip. Buy us a coffee or a meal if you're feeling generous and you have the means, on Ko-fi, Venmo, or Cash App. Your support keeps these stories alive, helps queer voices thrive, and gives you a front row seat to new worlds. Join us today and become part of the glorious community. Want front row seats to the next showdown? Be sure to subscribe to Glorious Magazine. And don't miss Part 11. Stay connected with the Coffee Bunny Crafters Cafe. Subscribe for cozy chaos, creative magic, and behind-the-scenes updates. And you can find me on Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and TikTok. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.